January 27, 1943. A single bulb swung like a slow pendulum over a long table in the Imperial General Headquarters. The room smelled of cigarette smoke, ink, and the cold metal of recently opened filing cabinets. Outside, Tokyo slept beneath a sky that had forgotten how to be peaceful. Inside, a dozen men in khaki uniforms hunched over stacks of paper and glossy aerial photography, the light catching on the brass of their rank insignia. Lieutenants, captains, a single colonel whose face was carved by too many late nights. They had been awake for 48 hours. The teletype in the corner hissed and clattered with fleet reports from the south. A battered radio set in the doorway kept spitting Morse code that a tired NCO translated into columns of numbers and place names. On the table lay an array of things that, until now, had been convenient abstractions for Tokyo strategy. Shipping manifests from intercepted merchant convoys, index cards from decoded Allied traffic, photographs of American docks and yards taken by long-range reconnaissance missions, and a handful of dry statistical tables that someone, an analyst too polite to look up from his work, had titled in English, "Shipbuilding Output, 1942. The colonel, Kanemaru, though nobody used his name, rank alone did the talking, tapped a photograph with a forefinger. The image, taken from a cruiser's float plane over a Californian harbor, showed row upon row of gleaming hulls, newly launched, still steaming from the slips. Men in dark coats walked the decks like ants. Alongside them, cranes towered like teeth. The lieutenant nearest the teletype read aloud, slow and careful. Liberty type, 60 launched last quarter, 90 planned, yards operating at full capacity. There was a silence that felt like the pause before a storm. No one moved. The room had been built for planning offensives, not for watching the enemy lay out his own industrial heartbeat. Yet here it was, on glossy paper, the pulse of a nation Japan had assumed was soft at its core. "America will replace what it loses," said one of the captains, voice low, as if spoken too loud would make the fact untrue. His hand trembled slightly as he pointed to a crude chart someone had made, columns growing like a forest. Merchant tonnage, aircraft produced, trucks and tanks, ship tonnage. The colonel's eyes did not leave the photograph. There were other images, reconnaissance of inland plants, aerial shots of factories that, to the untrained eye, looked like a child's model of a city. But under magnification, the rows of windows spelled assembly lines. A placard on one photograph, scrawled by an intelligence officer with neat block letters, read, "Ford Motor Plant, truck production, 12,000 per month." The NCO who read it swallowed. "They make tanks like we make rice," someone muttered. The phrase landed in the room like a stone. They had always assumed that the United States would not fight like a nation desperate enough to mobilize every factory and dock for war. In staff meetings in earlier months, in papers presented with formal civility, the tone had been consistent. America has wealth and industry, but she was a democracy. She would not sustain the prolonged sacrifices needed for total war. That assumption was a soft cushion against hard facts, and now that cushion was giving way. A map of the Pacific lay unfolded along the side of the table. Pushpins marked recent engagements. Arrows drawn in ink showed directions of planned movements. On the map, someone had affixed a small scrap of paper. Convoys unaffected. Resupply continues. It was this, more than the raw numbers, that made the colonel's jaw ache. The naval reports had come not as single defeats, but as a pattern. The Americans lost ships, yes, occasionally, but their merchant convoys continued to arrive at Guadalcanal and beyond. The logistical stream that Tokyo had hoped to choke, food, fuel, engines, still flowed.
There was a photograph of a yard where dozens of prefabricated Liberty hulls lay in various stages of completion. Next to it, a radio intercept transcription described a shipyard workers' strike resolved within days, replaced by women and men drafted into work details. Names like Rosie were foreign, but the meaning was not. A manpower reserve mobilized at home. The young lieutenant felt suddenly as if the floor had dissolved beneath him. "They are not a people who stop," he whispered. "They convert everything." Outside the room, a courier arrived breathless with a folded report stamped urgent. It was an American logistics report, captured from a downed plane, partial and ragged, but legible enough. Engines, continuous production, ship deliveries, increasing, aircraft spare parts, stockpiles. The colonel opened it with hands that did not quite obey. He read, lips moving. Around him, the room seemed to lean in, listening for a note that would somehow change the tenor of history. The realization did not come as a single thunderclap. It uncoiled slowly, a series of small, precise discoveries that stitched together into an unavoidable pattern. The Japanese intelligence apparatus had been good at counting ships and planes. It had not measured a different, more dangerous thing: the capacity to absorb loss and simply make more. Production, repair, replacement, an industrial cycle that turned with an economy not built for war alone, but able, with a swiftness that startled them, to pivot into one. Yamamoto's old warnings. The admiral had said the United States was a sleeping giant, let her sleep, echoed in the room like a strained memory. Many had nodded at those words months before, but in the sanitized atmosphere of pre-war calculations, the phrase had been a caution, not a prophecy. Now, confronted with columns of numbers and the faces of men building steel day after day, it read like something more specific, an enemy whose depth they had misread. On the table, someone had sketched a rough sentence and underlined it twice. "We underestimated capacity and time." The handwriting belonged to no one assigned to the room. It was a sentence that carried within it the weight of consequence, a fatal miscalculation written plainly. The men looked at each other, and, for the first time, at the scale of what their commanders had decided in council chambers far above this room. Decisions made with pride and urgency subtly looked fragile beneath the glare of a nation that could outbuild them. On the table, someone had sketched a rough sentence and underlined it twice. We underestimated capacity and time. The handwriting belonged to no one assigned to the room. It was a sentence that carried within it the weight of consequence, a fatal miscalculation written plainly. The men looked at each other, and, for the first time, at the scale of what their commanders had decided in council chambers far above this room. Decisions made with pride and urgency suddenly looked fragile beneath the glare of a nation that could outbuild them. Outside, the bulb swung, casting long shadows across the maps. The teletype clicked on, indifferent. The room, which had been a place of ledger and order, now thrummed with the small electric shock of a new fact. The enemy was not what they had hoped him to be. The word for that moment, disbelief sliding into dread, was not yet spoken aloud, but the men who lived it felt its edges. A war thought manageable because of assumed weaknesses now looked, in the cold light of January, like something else entirely. The train continues across the plains, vanishing into a haze of dust and distance. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka lowers his binoculars slowly, the metal still warm against his fingers. The rumble of America's industrial pulse vibrates through the soles of his boots as he crouches deeper into the shadow of the ridge. He writes because he has no other choice. He records because what he is seeing should have been impossible. A dozen locomotives, hundreds of freight cars, all loaded with engines, airframes, propellers, and crates stamped with codes he does not yet understand. Wind sweeps across the grass. Somewhere far behind him, a station bell rings, long, deep, and indifferent. Tanaka presses pencil to paper. His hands tremble. The first line he writes is not about the number of factories, nor the size of the convoys, nor the impossible quantities of steel. He writes, "Our assumption was wrong." Because that, more than the trains, the machines, the smoke, is what terrifies him. Tokyo had built its strategy on an image of America that no longer exists. A country soft, divided, slow to mobilize. A giant that had forgotten how to stand. But this is something else. This is a nation waking up with fire in its lungs. Tanaka shifts onto his stomach, burying himself deeper against the hill as a pickup truck bounces along the dirt road beneath him. Two American workers sit in the back, legs hanging off the side, hard hats clanking against a steel drum between them. One smokes, one sings. They look carefree, almost too carefree. Yet every direction he turns reveals discipline hidden beneath the casual exterior. Assembly yards, training depots, maintenance crews moving with clockwork rhythm. This is not chaos.
This is choreography, mass production as a military doctrine. His field radio crackles once, barely audible. A coded call from his embedded partner, Lieutenant Yamada, positioned closer to the manufacturing hub. The voice is tense. "You need to see this," Yamada whispers. "The factories, they don't stop, not for a moment." Tanaka hears the roar of machinery behind him through the radio. Even from here, the sky glows orange at night from foundries burning through the dark. "How many?" Tanaka asks. He already fears the answer. "More than we thought, more than anyone thought, and they're expanding." Yamada hesitates. "Hiroshi, I counted 20 new structures. They are building factories next to factories." For a moment, Tanaka says nothing. He looks across the endless flat horizon and feels something he has never felt in uniform. A sinking realization that Japan's timetable, the Yamato dreams of a quick war, may already be collapsing beneath the weight of American steel. He returns his gaze to the convoy. The last freight cars roll past, each marked with stencils. B-24 wing set, urgent. Pratt & Whitney, engine blocks. Lockheed fuselage panels, do not delay. The words feel like warnings meant for him. Tanaka closes the notebook. He has enough, far more than enough. He tightens the strap of his case. Documents, sketches, maps, coded notes. Evidence that Japan's war planners desperately need, but may no longer be able to accept. Because information like this does not merely contradict the Imperial General Staff's expectations, it destroys them. He starts down the back side of the ridge, keeping low, moving fast. Clouds of dust swirl behind him with every step. The earth smells of iron and summer heat. He glances back once more. The Americans are still working, still building, still multiplying. It is a scene of unending momentum, a machine with no off switch. Tokyo, he thinks, will not understand this. Not yet. Maybe not ever. His boots hit the hard-packed soil of the valley floor. He quickens his pace. The report must be transmitted tonight, before the window closes, before counterintelligence sweeps the area again. Tanaka reaches a small cluster of abandoned grain silos, his rendezvous point. A figure emerges from behind the concrete pillars. Lieutenant Yamada, dust-covered, sweating, eyes wide with the same grim recognition. "Did you see?" Yamada asks, voice hoarse. Tanaka nods. He doesn't trust himself to speak. Yamada pulls a crumpled sketch from his satchel, an overhead view of an aircraft plant. The drawing is crude, hurried, but the scale is unmistakable. Assembly lines longer than warships, parking lots filled with workers, material stockpiles that dwarf entire Japanese arsenals. "They're producing airplanes like we produce bicycles," Yamada whispers, "and parts faster than we can shoot them down." Silence hangs between them, thick, heavy, undeniable. Then Tanaka says the words neither wants to hear. "If we misjudged this, we misjudged the war." The wind shifts. A distant siren wails. Somewhere to the north, a new plume of smoke rises.
Another factory firing up for the night shift. Tanaka realizes this is not the peak of American production. This is only the beginning. He grips the notebook. He breathes once. He prepares the message that may be dismissed, buried, or ignored, but must be sent. Because Japan is fighting a country they never understood. A country becoming something unstoppable. A country waking up. Night falls like a curtain. The plains turn black except for the distant glow of furnaces and the pulsing rhythm of assembly lights. The noise carries across the fields. Steel pressed, cranes pivoting, pneumatic tools hammering in relentless succession. Captain Tanaka and Lieutenant Yamada crouch behind the grain silo, the shadow swallowing them whole. Their portable transmitter, a compact, unmarked Japanese set, sits between them. Its metal surface gleams faintly in the moonlight. Tanaka unwraps a handkerchief and removes the encoded briefing he drafted on the ridge. He hesitates. Not because he fears being caught, not because the radio signal might be intercepted, but because the truth he is about to send will collide violently with everything Tokyo believes. Yamada senses the hesitation. "We have to," he murmurs. "If headquarters refuses to see it, then the war is already lost." Tanaka exhales sharply through his nose. Resolve hardens. He begins transmitting. Short bursts of encrypted pulses cut through the night. 3,000 miles away, in Tokyo, the Imperial General Staff will receive a message stating that the United States is not preparing for war. It is mass-producing a storm. As the transmission flows, Yamada scans the horizon nervously. Diesel engines roar somewhere beyond the tree line. Flashlights sweep across the dark. American military police patrols. They've stepped up their presence in the region in the last 24 hours. Something has alerted them. Tanaka continues tapping the key, knuckles white. His encoded phrases are clinical, precise. Enemy aircraft production projected to exceed 80,000 annually. Industrial capacity underestimated by factor of 4. Nation mobilized to wartime footing far earlier than presumed. He pauses before typing the most critical line. Japanese strategic assumptions no longer align with American reality. Yamada looks at him, eyes reflecting both fear and the weight of honesty. "Send it," he whispers. Tanaka presses the key. The message shoots across the ether. The final burst of code fades into static. Tanaka switches off the transmitter and buries it beneath a loose panel of the silo floor. The night seems to exhale, as if relieved. "What do you think they'll say?" Yamada asks quietly. Tanaka knows exactly what they'll say. Impossible. American morale is weak. Their people are unprepared. They lack resolve. These are the foundations of Japan's war plan. Not data, not reconnaissance. Assumptions. Tanaka replies, "Tokyo will call it an exaggeration, but this," he gestures to the glowing horizon, "cannot be exaggerated." They start moving,
The rendezvous car, a rusted pickup acquired through a local sympathizer, waits half a mile away. Every step must be deliberate, every sound measured. American patrols are closer now. Boots crunch on gravel. A dog barks. The war feels near, closer than ever before. Halfway to the vehicle, the ground vibrates. A deep, rolling tremor, followed by a mechanical roar that grows louder and louder. Yamada freezes. Tanaka presses himself flat to the earth. Headlights bloom over the ridge, blinding cones sweeping across the grass. The silhouettes of trucks, jeeps, and flatbeds emerge. A new convoy. Bigger, longer, heavier. This time, the freight isn't hidden behind walls or crates. This time, it is open for all to see. Dozens of B-17 fuselages, silver skeletons glinting under moonlight, each strapped across a flatbed trailer. Wings wrapped in protective canvas. Rows of radial engines suspended from steel frames, like organs being transplanted for transplant. And then the detail that punches the breath from Tanaka's chest. The convoy is marked non-stop priority Pacific Front. Direct, unambiguous, inevitable. America is not building for the possibility of war. America is building for victory.
Yamada whispers. How do we fight a country that can replace everything we destroy by next month? Tanaka does not answer. He can't. The truth sits like a stone in his throat. The convoy rumbles past. 50 trucks, then 60, then more. A chain of steel stretching beyond sight. When the last vehicle disappears into the dark, the planes fall quiet again. But the silence feels different now. Not peace. Preparation. The United States is becoming something elemental, a forge, a foundry, a titan awakening under floodlights and factory smoke. And Tokyo is still dreaming of a short war. Tanaka and Yamada reach the pickup at last. The engine turns over weakly, coughing dust. As Yamada drives, Tanaka looks back one final time at the horizon. The glow, the smoke, the tireless movement. He finally understands. Japan didn't just misjudge America's industry. They misjudged America itself. A nation insulted, a nation provoked, a nation now accelerating toward total mobilization, and nothing will slow it down. Tokyo, War Ministry Headquarters. 5 days later. Rain lashes against the tall windows of the conference chamber, drumming like urgent fingers demanding to be heard. The air inside is thick with cigarette smoke and the heavy musk of wet uniforms. Senior officers sit around a long wooden table, faces stern, jaws tight. The room dim except for a single lantern glowing over stacks of documents. Captain Tanaka stands at the far end of the chamber, soaked from the downpour, boots muddy from travel, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. His decoded intelligence report lies on the table before the generals. Most of them haven't even touched it. General Kurowa, a rigid man carved from old samurai pride, taps the cover sheet once with a dismissive finger. "So," he says, voice flat, "you claim the Americans are producing aircraft at a rate no Western nation has ever achieved." Tanaka does not flinch. "I do not claim it, General. I saw it." Another general, Colonel Yamashita, leans back in his chair, hands clasped calmly across his stomach. "And their morale? What of that, Captain? The Americans are wealthy, spoiled. Their spirit is weak. Surely you observed that." Tanaka's breath catches, not in anger, but in disbelief. He recalls the tireless workers, the night shifts, the endless trains, the defiant hum that vibrated across the plains. Weak? He had never seen a nation more determined. "With respect, Colonel," Tanaka replies carefully, "the enemy is not complacent. They are focused, united, mobilizing at a speed I could not have imagined." The room stiffens. No one likes hearing that their war was built on fantasy. General Kurowa flips through the pages with open annoyance. 80,000 aircraft per year? He scoffs. This is nonsense. Even Britain cannot approach such numbers. "It is not Britain," Tanaka answers quietly. "It is America." The word hangs in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Yamashita narrows his eyes. A bold assertion, perhaps influenced by fear. Tanaka exhales slowly. He expected resistance. He expected denial. But the chasm between what he witnessed and what they are willing to believe is wider than he feared. The general staff doesn't want intelligence. They want confirmation. They want the world to behave as their strategy demands. Tanaka presses on anyway. "Factories are being constructed faster than we can chart them," he says, voice steady. "Convoys are already transporting B-17 fuselages directly to Pacific routes. Their industrial output is doubling every few months. America is preparing not for retaliation, but for..." Kurowa cuts him off with a raised hand. Enough. Silence suffocates the room. The generals exchange glances, dismissive, guarded, almost offended. Finally, General Kurowa leans forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing like a blade being drawn. "Captain Tanaka, our entire strategy, from the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies, rests on the assumption that the Americans lack both the will and the capability for a prolonged war. You ask us now to believe the opposite based on a few trains and factories?" Tanaka's voice cracks, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. "Not a few, sir. Thousands, and more every week." The words hang there. No one moves. The rain pounds harder against the glass, as if nature itself is trying to warn them. Colonel Yamashita clears his throat. "Even if what you say is true, Japan cannot afford to shift strategy. Mobilization has limits, industry has limits, time has limits. The Americans may be preparing for expansion, but we have already committed to action." There it is. The real reason. The empire is already on the path, and pride will not allow it to turn back. General Kurowa slides Tanaka's report aside as though pushing away an inconvenient meal. "You have done your duty, Captain.
he says coldly. Your field observations are noted. They are not noted. They are being buried. Tanaka bows deeply because that is what protocol demands, even when truth is drowning. But before he rises, he risks one final sentence, a whisper into the storm. If we underestimate America now, we will not survive what comes next. Kurowa's expression hardens into stone. Japan does not underestimate its enemies, he says. But Tanaka knows they already have. He steps back from the table. The generals continue discussing operations with forced confidence, their voices sharp, eager, blind. The war maps remain unchanged. The arrows pointing southeast remain bold and optimistic. The red markers representing Japanese advance still stretch across the Pacific like a triumphant tide. Not one of them sees the tsunami approaching from the east. American steel, American industry, American resolve. Tanaka leaves the chamber. The corridor feels colder than the rain outside. Yamada waits there for him, leaning silently against the wall. They didn't listen, did they? Yamada asks softly. Tanaka shakes his head. They won't, he says. And after a long pause, not until it's too late. The two men walk through the dim hallway, the muffled voices of the generals echoing behind them, still talking plans, still talking expansion, still talking victory, still dreaming. Out on the street, thunder rolls across the city. A storm is coming, one far greater than the one above Tokyo tonight. And Tanaka knows the truth with perfect, terrifying clarity. Japan hasn't just miscalculated America's power. They've miscalculated America's awakening. And no empire is prepared for that. Pearl Harbor, Remembrance Ceremony, December 7th, 1942, Hawaii. Exactly 1 year after the attack. Steam rises from the harbor as gray clouds drift low over the water. A chill moves through the crowd of mechanics, pilots, welders, and naval officers assembled on the pier. Many still wear their work overalls, sparks still clinging to their sleeves from the night shift. Admiral Chester Nimitz steps toward the microphone. He looks tired, but not defeated. Never defeated. Behind him, a line of newly built ships gleams in the morning light. Destroyers, cruisers, supply vessels, steel giants that did not exist a year ago. Nimitz clears his throat, and his voice carries across the harbor with the calm certainty of a man who knows what is coming. They thought they woke a sleeping giant, he says, but they did not know the giant was already rising. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. It's not rhetoric. It's not bravado. It's true. Because just a mile inland, behind the cover of warehouses and hills, American industry has transformed into something Japan never accounted for. Foundries glow red-hot 24 hours a day. Assembly lines spit out engines like clockwork. Logistics officers shout over rumbling forklifts. Crates of ammunition stack like monuments. The entire base hums with a force that feels less like work and more like destiny. And far across the Pacific, Captain Tanaka reads Nimitz's words in a Tokyo newspaper, the print smudged from the rain dripping off his coat. He sits alone in a small military dormitory, the walls thin, the air heavy. He circles a single line with his pencil, already rising. Because that's exactly what he saw in the American heartland weeks earlier. A nation accelerating, a nation tightening its jaw, a nation preparing to strike back with pressure, precision, and overwhelming production. He shuts the newspaper slowly. Yamada steps into the room, closing the door behind him. "You saw it?" he asks. Tanaka nods. "Yes." They sit in silence for a long time. Outside, Tokyo rushes on. Street vendors shouting under umbrellas, trains clattering across bridges, smoke from factories swirling overhead. The city lives as though the war is distant, theoretical, something happening on maps and radio broadcasts. But Tanaka knows better. He has seen the other side, the real side. They still think America can be pressured into negotiations, Yamada says bitterly, that a decisive blow will break their spirit. Tanaka looks down at the paper again. Shipyards, factories, armament plants. America is not breaking. America is sharpening. Midnight. War Ministry Communications Center. Rows of operators sit before radio desks, headphones pressed tight, decoding and routing endless streams of signals from the Pacific. Tanaka walks in, uninvited but not unwelcome. He knows the night shift well. These are the people who see the war as it truly is. The operator on duty hands him a fresh intel summary printed on coarse paper. "From the Pacific Fleet," the operator whispers. "You'll want to read this." Tanaka scans the page. USS Essex commissioned. USS Lexington new class launched. 42 new escort carriers nearing completion. His heartbeat slows. He reads further. War Production Board forecasts exponential aircraft output Q1 1943. Allied shipping tonnage expected to exceed Axis losses tenfold. He doesn't blink. He can't. This isn't potential. This isn't projection. This is momentum. A momentum Japan cannot match. A momentum Japan refuses to acknowledge. Yamada reads over his shoulder, jaw tightening. "They're building carriers faster than we can sink them," he whispers. Tanaka nods once. A soldier recognizing an unavoidable truth. The war has already changed shape. One side sees it, the other does not.
Across the ocean. A crane lowers a massive B-24 Liberator fuselage onto a waiting transport vehicle. Sparks shower from rivet guns. Spotlights sweep across the tarmac. Teams of welders, inspectors, and assembly crews move like a single living organism. A foreman shouts, "Bring in the next one! Move! Move!" Behind him, a sign hangs from the factory rafters. Victory is a production number. Below it, in fresh paint, aircraft output target 100,000 per year. No excuses. The Americans aren't preparing for war.
They're preparing to saturate it, to drown it, to overwhelm every battlefield with metal, fuel, and resolve. Back in Tokyo, Tanaka folds the intel summary carefully, almost reverently. He doesn't feel fear, not now. He feels clarity. The kind of clarity a man feels when the horizon is finally visible, and he sees the storm coming at full speed. We still have time to adapt, Yamada says quietly. Tanaka shakes his head. No, we had time. He looks out the window toward the night sky. But we spent it convincing ourselves the enemy was weak. He returns his gaze to the document. America's factories. America's fleets. America's awakening. Everything he warned about is unfolding faster than even he predicted. We're not fighting sailors and soldiers, Tanaka murmurs. We're fighting an industrial civilization. He closes his eyes. And we attacked before we understood it. Outside, thunder rumbles faintly over the capital. Or maybe it's not thunder. Maybe it's the echo of American engines rolling across the Pacific. Midway Atoll, January 1943. Wind sweeps across the flat coral ground like a blade, carrying salt and the distant smell of aviation fuel. Floodlights cast long white beams across the rough runway where ground crews scramble around a new arrival that should not exist. Not this fast, not in these numbers, not in this place. A brand new Essex-class carrier task group is anchored beyond the reef. Fresh paint, fresh steel, fresh engines throbbing with unspent power. The Pacific has changed while Japan wasn't looking. And now, before dawn touches the horizon, the first wave of American aircraft begins to land. Hellcats, Dauntlesses, Avengers, pilots stepping onto the tarmac with the calm swagger of men who know reinforcements will always arrive. Because their nation will always build more. At that exact moment, over 3,800 miles away, a coded message reaches Tokyo. A priority intercept, stamped urgent, stamped unavoidable. Tanaka is summoned to the underground intelligence room before he's even finished tying his uniform sash. The corridors pulse with whispered rumors. Something has shifted on the ocean, something too large to ignore. Yamada meets him halfway down the stairs. "You felt it?" Yamada asks. Tanaka nods. "I did." They both know this feeling. The silence before the verdict, the breath before collapse. Inside the room, junior officers cluster around a map of the Central Pacific. Red pins show Japanese garrisons. Blue markers show American positions. But the blue markers have multiplied. Again, again, again. Every time Tanaka sees this map, America grows. A radio operator stands and salutes shakily. "Captain, transmission from our Midway observers." Tanaka takes the slip of paper. He reads the first line. His pulse pauses. Enemy carrier strength in theater now exceeds estimates by 300%. The next line, multiple Essex class, at least 2 Independence class, several escort carriers. The next, effective immediately, U.S. Navy has regained operational dominance. The room falls silent. Yamada whispers the only words possible. 300%? That's impossible. Tanaka doesn't look up. It's America, he replies quietly. Impossible is what they mass produce. He steps closer to the map and moves a single blue token representing the Essex group. The room watches. One token should not matter. One marker should not change the war. But this one does. Because it is not a ship. It is a symbol. A symbol of what Japan refused to believe. America can outbuild defeat itself. In Tokyo's war plans, Japan calculated battles, fleets, carriers, pilots, ranges. They never calculated replacement speed. They never calculated industrial replacement rate. They never calculated a nation turning anger into assembly lines. Tanaka sets the blue token down gently. This, he says, is the consequence. Meanwhile, at Midway, a squadron of brand new F-6F Hellcats takes off, engines screaming, tires smoking on the runway. They rise sharply into the cold morning air, climbing in perfect formation, shadows slicing across the surf below. From the control tower, an American flight officer watches them lift, one after another, endless as a conveyor belt. He mutters under his breath, "Not bad for ships that didn't exist last summer." Behind him on a chalkboard, someone has written, "Replacement rate. Planes lost per day, 38. Planes built per day, 200. Someone circled the last number. Someone underlined it. Twice. A mechanic laughs as he wipes oil from his hands. "Don't worry," he says to a pilot climbing into the cockpit. "Whatever you lose, Detroit will mail us 2 more." The pilot smirks. "Ain't my job to conserve airplanes. My job is to win." He slams the canopy shut. The Hellcat blasts forward and vanishes into the clouds. Tokyo does not see this, but Tanaka imagines it perfectly, because he has seen it on American soil with his own eyes. What he witnessed in Kansas and Ohio is now materializing across the Pacific in steel and fire. He turns to the intelligence staff. "How did our naval command respond?" he asks. A junior officer swallows hard. "They don't believe the numbers, sir. They say American propaganda inflates them." Tanaka closes his eyes. Propaganda, fantasy, pride. Every dangerous word behind a dying empire. He speaks softly, almost to himself. America inflates nothing. They don't need to. Yamada grips the edge of the table, knuckles pale. If the Essex class has arrived in numbers, then our perimeter, Truck, Rabal, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, none of it is safe. Tanaka nods. They will come, fast, hard, and in quantities we cannot match. Can't or won't? Yamada asks. Tanaka looks him in the eyes. Both. A phone rings sharply, once, twice, 3 times. The room tenses. A communications officer answers, listens, then goes wide-eyed. Captain, urgent directive from Naval Command. Tanaka takes the phone. A voice on the other end, clipped and strained. American forces have begun major operations in the Central Pacific. Our outer defenses are collapsing faster than expected. Faster than expected. Tanaka hears the confession buried inside those words. Expected means predicted. Predicted means known. Known means denied. Tokyo had the signs. They simply refused to read them. He places the receiver down slowly. Then he says what no one else dares to. This is the beginning. No one asks beginning of what, because they all know. America has entered the war completely. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with industry. And now Japan must face the consequence of misjudging not just an enemy, but an entire nation. A nation that does not stop. A nation that does not tire. A nation that does not run out of steel. The storm has reached the Pacific, and Japan is standing in the open.
August 1943. Tokyo, midnight. The war room is lit only by a single overhead lamp, the kind that throws more shadows than light. The air is thick with humidity, cigarette smoke, and something heavier still, the quiet dread of men who realize they have miscalculated the future. Commander Toshikazu Ooka steps into the room carrying a fresh stack of intelligence reports. His uniform is crisp, but his eyes are hollow, dark moons carved by too many sleepless nights. In his hand is the newest translation from the Imperial Navy's attachés in Washington, intercepted through commercial channels, trade bulletins, engineering journals, and neutral observers. He doesn't sit. He just begins reading. At the center of the table, Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue watches him closely. The elder admiral has seen every phase of the war, China, the Pacific, the Philippines, and yet nothing so far unsettles him like the numbers recited in this cramped, overheated room. America will complete 28 fleet carriers by next year, Ooka reads, voice low. Silence. A pencil drops from someone's hand. Nobody moves to pick it up. Furthermore, he continues, their industrial centers have converted civilian automobile plants into mass aircraft factories. Detroit alone is producing more engines per month than our entire nation. The lamp flickers. A whisper at the table. Impossible. But it isn't. The officers lean forward as pages turn, each one more unbelievable than the last. American shipyards are launching a new Liberty ship every 3 days. The Essex-class carriers are rolling out almost too fast to track. General Motors is building aircraft in plants that once manufactured refrigerators. Women and teenagers are welding steel on night shifts. Japan's war planners had always believed America was soft, wealthy, unfocused, unwilling to stomach hardship.
a nation of pleasure seekers, not fighters, a country with no warrior spirit. But now, as the reports pile up on the lacquer table, it becomes undeniable. America is angry. America is organized. And America is awake. Ooka turns another page. The United States has introduced a new mass production technique for B-24 bombers. One factory, Ford's Willow Run, aims to produce 1 bomber per hour.
1 bomber per hour. An officer exhales sharply through his teeth, almost a hiss. Inoue closes his eyes. This is the moment, unspoken but unmistakable, when everyone in the room realizes that Pearl Harbor was not a finishing blow. It wasn't even a crippling strike. It was a provocation. A spark that had ignited something Japan was never prepared to confront. A continental giant with endless resources, bottomless manpower, and a manufacturing engine capable of reshaping the world. The room shifts, officers stir, papers rustle. Someone asks, "Can we match this?" No one answers, because they all know the truth. Japan is an archipelago with limited steel, limited oil, limited industry. Their factories are small, their supply lines overstretched, their pilots irreplaceable, their ships impossible to rebuild in wartime. America, by contrast, has oceans of oil, mountains of ore, and factories measured not in buildings, but in square miles. The silence stretches until Inoue finally opens his eyes. "It seems," he says slowly, "that we misunderstood the enemy." No one argues. He continues, voice heavy with the kind of clarity that comes only when illusions collapse. "We believed America lacked discipline. We believed they lacked resolve. We were wrong on both." He nods toward the reports. This is not the production of a soft people. This is the production of a nation enraged. For a moment, no one speaks. Then Ooka adds the last line from his report, softly, almost reluctantly. "Experts estimate that by 1944, American output will exceed the combined production of all Axis powers." The words hang there like a final verdict. Not shouted, not dramatized, just true. In that small room in Tokyo, beneath the dim light bulb, Japan's military intelligence officers finally understand the colossal reality before them. They had awakened America, and now nothing could stop it.